They found her where the world had broken. Out past the old rockfall, a place the earth itself had tried to forget. A graveyard of stone where no sane rider took a horse and no man's tracks survived a single storm. Two of our best Lakota scouts, chasing a wounded antelope, almost missed her. They saw a flicker of movement, not an animal, something else. A woman. She was crouched behind a pile of jagged boulders, barefoot, knees pulled so tight to her chest she looked like a child hiding from a thunderstorm, but it was her eyes that stopped them cold, wild, cornered, the eyes of something that knew the trap was already sprung. Her feet were a horror, blistered raw, cracked open, and bleeding onto the sharp stones. But she didn't move, not when they called out in our tongue, not when they switched to the settlers' language. She just stared, as if they were ghosts, or maybe as if she was. One of the scouts, a young man named Chaska, dismounted. He moved slow, careful, the way you approach a half-wild mare. He held out his water skin. She didn't even blink. He offered a shawl, gesturing to the cold wind that was whipping her torn dress around her legs. The dress was dusted with a fine gray ash, the kind left over when a house, or a life, burns to the ground. There was no blood on her, no bruises they could see. Just the silence. A silence so deep it felt louder than a scream. When they finally coaxed her to her feet, she winced, a sharp intake of breath that was the first sound she'd made. But she walked, limping, staggering. She let them lead her back toward the camp. She arrived like a phantom drifting in on the evening tide. The whole village went quiet. The children stopped their games. The women paused their work, eyes wide with a mix of pity and fear. Who was this woman? Where did she come from? The elders whispered among themselves. Had she escaped a wagon train? Been abandoned by her own kind? One of them, an old woman named Shuya, who had seen more winters than anyone, looked at the girl's feet and then at her eyes. This one was not lost, Shuya murmured. This one tried to erase herself. No one asked her name. It felt wrong, like asking a spirit for its papers. She didn't offer it. She didn't offer anything, not even a glance. Shuya, the camp's midwife and healer, led her to a quiet spot by the fire. She gently took a cloth and a bowl of warm water infused with wild mint. As she began to clean the woman's feet, the story got worse. These weren't just blisters from walking. These were burns, deep, puckered scars that spoke of hot coals and searing agony. The woman flinched, but she let Shuya work, her gaze locked on the distant canyon mouth, as if she was expecting something to come roaring out of it, something she was terrified of, or someone. From the edge of the firelight, one man watched. He didn't join the circle of whispers. He didn't offer help. He just stood in the shadows of the pines, still as a hunting cat. His name was Nashoda. In our language, it means the one who stands still while the storm passes. And a storm was coming. He could feel it. He noticed things the others missed. The way she flinched when a man's boots scraped too loud on the dirt. The way her hands trembled, constantly clenching and unclenching. She wasn't just scared of what was behind her. She was scared of everything in front of her, too. That night, they gave her a bowl of stew. She took it, but only ate a few bites, her eyes never leaving the darkness beyond the camp. When everyone else had retired to their lodges, she limped away from the warmth of the fire. She went to the creek, the water so cold it was close to freezing. She sat on the bank and plunged her burned feet into the icy current, scrubbing at them with a desperate, frantic energy, like she was trying to wash off something that wasn't dirt, something no one else could see. Nashoda watched from the trees. He wasn't a predator. He wasn't a protector. He was just a witness. He stayed hidden until she finally broke. Her voice was a ragged whisper, torn from the deepest part of her soul. "I'm not worthy," she sobbed into the darkness. "I'm not worthy to be anyone's bride." Then she did something that made the cold night air freeze in his lungs. She took a step deeper into the river, then another, the current pulling at her ruined dress. It looked like she was trying to let the water take her, to let the river wash away her name, her pain, her very existence. Nashoda didn't move. He didn't call out. He just watched, his heart a stone in his chest, because he knew something profound. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. But maybe, just maybe, you can show them a reason to save themselves. By morning, she was back. Someone had guided her out of the river, back to the warmth of a borrowed lodge. They gave her a small, private tent at the edge of the camp, under the shade of the tall pines. A place to be alone, without being abandoned. Shuya found her there, sitting cross-legged on the ground, trying to bind her own mangled feet with strips torn from the hem of her dress. Her fingers were clumsy, shaking too much to tie a proper knot. The pain must have been excruciating. Shuya knelt without a word. She gently pushed the woman's hands away and took the cloth. With practiced, silent movements, she cleaned the wounds again and wrapped them in fresh, soft buckskin. When she was done, the woman finally looked up. Her gaze drifted past Shuya, toward the tree line, and there he was, Nashoda. He hadn't slept in the main camp. Some said he preferred the company of trees, that the air was cleaner out there. Others whispered he carried ghosts that were too loud for canvas walls. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. The woman flinched as if she'd been struck. A wave of pure, uncut shame washed over her face. She looked away, turning her head so fast it must have hurt her neck. But it was too late. He'd seen it. He'd seen the truth she was trying so hard to hide. It wasn't just the burns. It was something deeper, a feeling of worthlessness so profound it had poisoned her from the inside out. She held herself like her own body was a stolen coat, something she didn't deserve to wear. Nashoda started walking toward her. Slow, deliberate. His hands were open, empty, not a threat. She watched him, her body tensed, ready to bolt. He stopped a few feet away and knelt down. It wasn't a gesture of submission. It was a gesture of respect. He held a folded piece of soft deerskin. He looked at it like it was a trap. He unwrapped it. Inside was a dark, fragrant paste. Crushed willow bark, healing roots, things that would soothe the fire in her skin. She didn't reach for it. Her eyes darted from the paste to his face, then back again. Suspicion. Fear. So he simply set it on the ground between them. He gave her one long, steady look. It held no pity. It asked no questions. It was just a look of quiet, solid understanding. Then he stood up and walked away. The little pot of medicine sat there for hours. The sun moved across the sky. The camp went about its business. The woman didn't move. She just stared at it. Finally, as dusk began to settle, she crawled forward and touched it. Her fingers trembled as she scooped up a small amount of the paste and applied it to her wounds. That night, Shuya brought her a bowl of soup. She found the deerskin cloth rinsed clean, folded neatly, and placed by the tent flap. An offering returned, a silent thank you. But the real change didn't happen until the third night. She made her ritual walk to the creek again, drawn by a need she couldn't explain. This time she wasn't alone. Nashoda was there, not hiding in the shadows, but sitting on a fallen log, sharpening a stone blade. The moonlight glinted off the edge. She froze. Her first instinct was to run, but she didn't. She didn't speak either. She just walked to the water's edge, a few yards away from him, and sat down. She let the silence stretch between them, a bridge built of things unsaid. A cool breeze blew a strand of her dark hair across her face. For a moment she didn't look broken. She looked halfway to being reborn. Then she did something that shocked them both. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted one of her bandaged feet. She pressed the raw, healing heel into the damp earth. It was a challenge, a silent dare. If you're going to look, the gesture screamed, then look, see all of it. Nashoda didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He just set his blade down on the log. Without asking permission, without any ceremony, he reached into his satchel and pulled out a fresh, clean cloth. He moved to the creek, dipped the cloth in the icy water, and knelt in front of her. She gasped when his hand closed gently around her ankle. Not a gasp of pain, a gasp of shock. His touch was firm, steady. He began to wash her foot, carefully, tenderly, cleaning away the grime and the ash that still clung to her skin. A single sob escaped her lips, then another. But she didn't pull away. She let him hold her brokenness in his hands. Back at the camp, Shuya had to warn the others away. "Leave her be," she told the curious onlookers. "Don't crowd her. Don't ask about where she came from. Her story is not for our ears yet." But you can't stop whispers. Rumors slithered through the camp like smoke from a damp fire. They said she was cursed. They said she brought bad medicine. The children watched her with wide, fearful eyes, as if she might vanish with the morning frost, leaving a scorch mark where she'd slept. She ate little. She spoke not at all. She built a small circle of stones around her tent, a tiny, fragile border between her and the world, a small illusion of control in a life that had spun out of it. Nashoda never tried to touch her again, but his quiet offerings continued. Each evening he would leave something by her stone circle, a strip of smoked jerky, a handful of sweetened roots, a more warmly woven shawl, never too much, never too bold. It was a language only they understood, a quiet conversation that said, "You are not invisible. You are not a ghost. I see you. But shame is a poison that makes you deaf to kindness." She would sit for hours, staring at her bandaged feet, whispering to herself. Horrible, broken phrases that Nashoda could sometimes overhear from a distance. "He said I ruined it. He said no man would ever. He said I was filth." Her voice would trail off, and she would curl into herself, trying to become smaller, trying to disappear into the dirt. One evening, Shuya had had enough. She brought Talina a bowl of hot broth and sat with her, her eyes firm but kind. "The scars are not what make you unworthy," the old woman said, her voice gentle but unyielding. "It's the lie someone told you about them." The girl's head snapped up, her eyes wet but burning with a sudden fire. "You don't know," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You don't know what I did. I let him," she choked out. "I let him when I thought it meant love. And then the fire came." Her body began to tremble violently. "He ran. He left me. And they all said it was my fault, my shame." Shuya's jaw clenched so hard, a muscle jumped in her cheek. "Whose fire?" she asked, her voice dangerously low. The girl's answer was a barely audible whisper. "My father's." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. "He found out about the blacksmith's son. He said I brought shame to his house. He said he would cleanse it with fire. I wasn't fast enough. My sister, She couldn't finish. The words were caught in her throat, strangled by grief and horror. Shuya stood up and walked away, her own hands shaking with a rage she couldn't show. That night, Nashoda approached the stone circle differently. He didn't bring medicine. He didn't bring food. He brought words. He sat on the ground just outside her circle of stones, close enough for her to hear him speak in a low, even tone. "In my tongue," he said, his voice calm and steady, "we have no word for ruined. We only have a word for marked by fire. And fire does not destroy. It transforms." She went perfectly still. The sound of his voice, after so much silence, was a shock to her system. You speak?" she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. He nodded once, his eyes never leaving hers. "Only when the silence becomes a cruelty." She stared at him, trying to solve the puzzle of this man. This quiet warrior who had shown her more kindness than she had ever known, without asking for a single thing in return. This man who seemed to see past the scars, past the shame, to something else inside her. "I don't deserve this," she murmured, her gaze falling back to her feet. "I told you, I'm not worthy to be anyone's bride." He didn't argue with her, he didn't try to convince her, he just looked at her feet, wrapped in the cloths he'd provided. But she saw his jaw tighten. She saw his hands clench into fists at his sides. And in that breathless, silent moment, she knew. She knew he was fighting a war inside himself, a war against the men who had done this to her, a war against the world that had told her she was worthless. It wasn't a battle of grief. It was a battle of pure, cold fury. The air smelled of pine smoke and the coming winter. The camp was quiet, except for the slow, steady beat of a single drum, a heartbeat for the world. Talina, as she now secretly called herself in her own mind, sat outside her tent, watching the distant fires. She didn't expect him, but she knew the sound of his footsteps now. Soft, deliberate, never rushed. Nashoda stopped a few paces from her stone circle. He knelt down and placed a small, carved wooden bowl on the ground. It was filled with warm water, steam rising from it in the cold air. "Why?" she asked, her voice a ghost of a sound. "You don't even know my name." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his belt and pulled out a rolled-up cloth, a piece of soft, clean deerskin. He laid it next to the bowl, and then he waited. His eyes were steady, not demanding, not even kind, really. Just present. He created a space of safety with his stillness. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her feet, her ugly, scarred, burned feet, the symbol of all her shame. The blacksmith's son had flinched when he saw them. He had turned and walked away without a word. But Nashoda didn't move. He just knelt there, waiting. Finally, trembling, she did it. She slid her foot out from under her dress and placed it in the bowl of warm water. He reached for it. His touch was so slow, so reverent, it was like he was handling a sacred object. She gasped, not from pain. It was the shock of tenderness, a feeling so foreign it was almost frightening. He didn't scrub, he didn't rush. He just gently passed the wet cloth over her skin, over the arch, over each toe, over the puckered, angry scars. It felt like he was memorizing them, not cleaning them, like he was reading a story written in pain and honoring every word. The fire had taken her skin, but he was giving her back her soul. When he moved to her other foot, she finally found her voice. "I don't understand," she whispered. His hands paused. He looked up, his face etched in the flickering firelight. "My sister," he said, his voice thick with a grief that was old, but still raw. "She died the night the soldiers came. She was younger than you." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The story was there in the hard lines around his mouth, in the deep sorrow in his eyes. This wasn't about pity. This was about connection. He wasn't just kneeling for her. He was kneeling for his sister. For a girl no one had been there to save. For all the women who were forced to carry shame, that wasn't theirs. When he finished, he wrapped both of her feet in a warm, dry cloth. He remained kneeling before her, his head bowed slightly. She opened her mouth to thank him, but the words wouldn't come. They felt too small, too hollow. Instead, she leaned forward and did something incredibly brave. She touched his hand, just for a second. A flicker of contact. "My name," she said, her voice clear and steady for the first time. "My name is Talina." He looked up. He didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He just nodded slowly. "I know," he said. And then he stood, leaving the bowl, the cloth, and something else behind. Something huge and unspoken that settled deep inside her, like a prayer that had been answered before she even knew how to speak it. That night was different. Talina didn't sleep, not really. The warmth from the cloths still lingered around her feet, but it was the memory of Nashoda's hands that circled her heart. Gentle, reverent. She sat by her small fire, hugging her knees, whispering her own name. Talina. Talina. Not the girl. Not the intruder. Not the burned one. Talina. The name she had tried to outrun. The name he had given back to her. At dawn, Shuya came with flatbread and a pouch of herbs. Her expression was unreadable. "You let him wash your feet," she stated. It wasn't a question. Talina didn't answer. She just looked into the flames. "The other women? They are talking," Shuya said, kneeling to add a stick to the fire. "Some are jealous. They have wanted Nashoda for many seasons. Others are afraid. They think you have put a spell on him." Talina flinched. "I didn't ask him to do it." "That's not what they see," Shuya sighed. "And that is not what he was offering. In our way, a man does not touch a woman's feet unless he sees her spirit as sacred ground. He has made a silent vow to you, child. You will have to decide what to do with that kind of mercy." Talina swallowed hard, her heart starting to race in a way it never had before. Not for the blacksmith's son, not for anyone. "He shouldn't have," she whispered, the old shame rising like bile in her throat. "If he knew what I've done, what I lost, he would leave me in the snow. You think he doesn't know sorrow?" Shuya's voice was soft but sharp. "The soldiers who took his sister didn't just kill her. They put a war inside him. A quiet, terrible war. And yet he brings you peace. That is not a man who judges, Talina. That is a man who listens for the stories no one else is brave enough to hear." Later that day, Talina felt a new kind of courage. She walked out of her tent and saw Nashoda by the tree line, feeding his horse a piece of dried apple. He didn't turn around, but he spoke as she approached. "I can walk with you to the edge of the woods. The wolves will not bother you if I am near." It was an offer to help her leave, to run away again. She stopped, stunned. "Why would I leave?" He turned then, his eyes as steady as the mountains. "Because some people run when they are finally shown kindness. It can be more frightening than cruelty." She took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs. "I am tired of running." A small, almost imperceptible change happened in his expression, a softening. "Then stay," he said, "but do not stay for me. Stay because you know your name again." Her knees felt weak. For the first time in years, she felt the sting of tears behind her eyes. But it wasn't the hot tear of shame. It was something else. Something melting. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The days that followed were a quiet rhythm. Talina began to emerge from her shell. She helped Shuya grind herbs. She learned to mend the children's moccasins, her fingers still trembling but growing more steady each day. She kept her gaze low when Nashoda was near, but the silence between them was no longer a void. It was full, pregnant with unspoken things. One afternoon, she overheard two young women whispering by the river. One of them, a widow named Makta, pointed a finger at Talina. She said something about damaged goods and bad spirits. The other girl giggled. The old Talina would have run. She would have hidden in her tent and let the shame consume her. The new Talina turned and walked toward them. She didn't say a word. She just met Makta's gaze with a steady, unflinching look. The widow's cruel smile faltered. She looked away first. Talina walked on, her head held high. She found Nashoda near the drying racks, sharpening his hunting knife. "They are saying things," she said, her voice even. "About you. About me." He didn't look up from his work. The knife scraped against the stone with a rhythmic shk, shk, shk. "What do you say?" he asked. She hesitated. That was the question, wasn't it? What did she have to say about it? I don't know yet." "Then say nothing." he replied, his voice calm. Until you do. He finished sharpening the blade and handed her a strip of smoked bison. It wasn't a gift, it was a statement, a reminder of patience, of taking what you need when you need it. You've never asked me what happened, she said suddenly, before I came here. He finally looked up, his dark eyes seeming to pierce right through her. Do you think it matters what you were? Most men would think so. A flicker of something hard and dangerous passed through his eyes. Then they were not men. They were frightened boys playing dress-up in their father's clothes. She stared at him, breathless. You speak like someone who has known love. I have known loss, he corrected her gently. The words come from there. That night, something shifted. Shuya placed an extra bowl of stew by the main fire. When Nashoda arrived, he didn't take his usual spot at the edge of the circle. He walked deliberately to the fire and sat down in the empty space, right next to Talina. A hush fell over the group. Makta, the widow, shot a venomous glare in their direction. No one said a word, but the change was as loud as a thunderclap. This was a public declaration. After they ate, Nashoda stood up. He looked down at Talina and extended his hand. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a demand to dance or follow him into the darkness. It was a simple offer, to help her rise. She didn't take it, not yet, but she looked at his open palm for a long, long moment, long enough for everyone to see. And in that silent pause, the camp no longer saw a broken, nameless girl. They saw a story that was rewriting its own ending. Later, huddled in her blankets, Shuya whispered to her, "You can still say no, child. His honor would demand he accept it." Talina stared into the embers of the dying fire. He hasn't asked me anything. A man like Nashoda does not ask with words, Shuya said, her voice filled with ancient wisdom. He asks with his actions. He asks with what he carries. He asks with his silence. Talina looked down at her feet, still wrapped, still healing. The warmth from his touch seemed to linger there permanently, and for the first time, the word bride didn't sound like a curse. It sounded like a beginning. The next morning, the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Talina woke before dawn, a strange dream still clinging to her. She had dreamt of her mother, who she barely remembered. In the dream, her mother hadn't spoken. She had just hummed a soft lullaby while brushing Talina's hair. Then she watched as Talina walked barefoot into a river of fire and emerged on the other side, clean and whole. She woke with tears on her cheeks. She needed air. She slipped out of the lodge and walked toward the trees. Nashoda was already there, carving a piece of crooked pine branch with his knife. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "You were dreaming loud," he said without looking up. "What?" "You sigh in your sleep," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Like the wind in the pines. It's hard to miss." She almost smiled back. "I dreamed of someone I never really knew." He didn't ask who. He simply held up the branch he was carving. It was bent, but the wood was strong. "You think this is strong enough to hold a woman's weight?" She narrowed her eyes. "Are you planning on hanging someone?" "I was planning on building a cradle," he said, his voice perfectly even. "For holding things, deerskins, firewood, maybe a child one day." Her heart gave a painful lurch. "That's very forward of you." "Forward," he said, his knife moving smoothly over the wood, "is the only direction worth walking." A heavy silence fell between them. She sat on a log near him, pulling her knees to her chest. "I have to tell you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I have to tell you what really happened." "You do not have to do anything," he said, his focus still on the wood. "I was promised to a man I did not choose," she began, the words tumbling out of her now. "I ran away before the wedding. My father found me. He dragged me back. I begged him not to make me marry that man. He said..." She picked at a scab on her knuckle, her voice breaking. He said, "If I was so eager to be a woman, then I should learn what it felt like to be branded as a ruined one." Nashoda's hand stopped moving. The knife went still. He said nothing, but the pine branch in his hand snapped in two with a sharp crack. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, dangerous. It was the silence of a warrior holding back an avalanche of rage. "Do you want to go back there?" he asked finally, his voice tight. "To that house? To that name?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face now. "No, I want to forget I ever lived before the night you washed my feet." That seemed to stun him. He blinked once, then set the broken pieces of wood aside. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw the full depth of the emotion he kept so carefully hidden. It was a fierce, protective tenderness that took her breath away. "We do not speak vows the way the settlers do," he said, his voice low and solemn. "We make offerings. If I offer you my bow, it means I will hunt for you. If I offer you my fire, it means I will keep you warm. If I offer you my ground to sleep on, it means I will never leave you cold or alone in the dark." He stood up and looked down at her. "If I offer you my name," he said, "it means I believe your spirit is the only one that fits beside my own." She looked up at him, her heart feeling like it was going to beat its way out of her chest. "Come," he said, his voice suddenly gentle. "We have to find a better piece of wood. A cradle needs strong sides." She stood up and walked beside him into the forest, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was following. She felt like she was coming home. But the past is not a ghost. It is a hunter, and it was closer than they knew. 2 days later, a rider appeared on the horizon. He wasn't one of our own. He was a settler, riding a tired-looking horse, a white flag tied to a stick. He rode slowly into the center of our camp, his eyes darting around nervously. "I'm looking for a woman," he said, his voice raspy. "They said a hunting party found one, a girl with burns on her feet." Talina, who had been helping Shuya sort berries, froze. The basket dropped from her hands, scattering red jewels across the dirt. Every head in the camp turned to look at her. Nashoda moved to her side in an instant, a silent, solid wall of protection. "Who is asking?" Nashoda's voice was like stones grinding together. "Her father," the rider said. He sent me. He says there's been a terrible mistake. He says he wants her to come home." A lie. The word screamed in Talina's mind. It was a trap. Her father didn't want her home. He wanted her buried. But then the rider said something that changed everything. "It's not just him," the rider added, looking directly at Talina, his eyes filled with a strange pity. "It's the blacksmith, the father of the boy she was supposed to marry. He's dying, and he says he has a confession to make, a confession that concerns her." The world tilted on its axis. The blacksmith? A confession? What could he possibly have to confess? Shuya stepped forward, her face a mask of suspicion. "It is a trick," she said firmly. "They will take her, and we will never see her again." Makta, the jealous widow, sneered from the sidelines. "She should go. Her past follows her like a shadow. Let her face it and leave us in peace." The camp was divided. Fear on one side, suspicion on the other. Talina looked at Nashoda. His face was unreadable, but his hand rested on the hilt of the knife at his belt. "The choice is yours, Talina," he said, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "This is your story to finish. But you will not walk that path alone. If you go, I go with you." She looked at the messenger. She looked at the faces of the people who had taken her in. She thought of the blacksmith, a man who had always been kind to her before everything. A dying man's confession. "I will go," she said, her voice clear and strong. The journey was 2 days of tense, suffocating silence. The messenger rode ahead, and Talina and Nashoda followed. He didn't speak, but his presence was a constant, reassuring weight beside her. He was her anchor in a storm she was willingly riding back into. The settlement was just as she remembered it, a dusty, sad little collection of buildings that smelled of coal smoke and despair. The blacksmith's shop was at the edge of town. A grim-faced man, the blacksmith's son, her former betrothed, met them at the door. He wouldn't look at Talina. His eyes were filled with a confusing mix of anger and grief. "He's inside," he mumbled, and stood aside. The blacksmith was lying on a small cot in the back room. He was pale and thin, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but his eyes lit up when he saw Talina. "You came," he wheezed, trying to push himself up. "Thank God you came." "What is this?" Talina asked, her voice trembling. "What do you have to confess?" The old man's eyes filled with tears. "It was a lie, child," he choked out. "All of it. A terrible, wicked lie." He looked at his son, who stood stone-faced in the corner. "I never rejected you. Your father came to me. He told me that you were the one who refused the marriage. He said you were impure, that you had shamed yourself with another man. He said you were not fit to join my family." Talina felt the blood drain from her face. "What?" "I believed him." The blacksmith wept. "I was a fool, an old proud fool. I told my son to walk away. I told him you were not worthy of him. It was your father. He poisoned me against you. He created the whole story." Her mind was reeling. Her father had not only abused her, he had systematically destroyed her reputation, her future, her very name. He had turned the man she was to marry and his family against her with a calculated, vicious lie. But that wasn't the biggest twist. That wasn't the confession. "That's not all," the blacksmith gasped, fighting for breath. He grabbed Talina's hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "The fire. Listen to me, child. The fire was not about you." Talina stared at him, confused. "But he said he was cleansing the house of my shame." "Another lie," the blacksmith rasped. "It was a distraction. Your sister, your little sister Ilara, your father had debts, terrible debts to a cruel fur trapper. He was going to sell Ilara to that man, sell her like she was cattle." Talina's world shattered into a million pieces. Ilara, her sweet, innocent sister. "But she died in the fire," Talina whispered, the old familiar grief clawing at her throat. "No!" the blacksmith shouted, a last burst of strength. "She didn't die. Don't you understand? You set that fire, didn't you? You set it to create chaos, so she could escape." The truth hit Nashoda like a physical blow. He looked at Talina, and suddenly, everything made sense. Her strength, her silence, her shame. It had never been her own. "Her lover," the blacksmith continued, his voice fading. "A young farm hand. You helped them run. And you ran back into that burning barn, didn't you? You burned your own feet on the coals. You made it look like you were a victim, a girl who barely escaped. You took all the blame, all the shame, all the pain onto yourself, so they would chase you, and not her." Talina was sobbing now, her whole body shaking with the force of a story she had carried alone for so long. She hadn't been a victim who was ruined. She had been a hero who had sacrificed everything. Nashoda stepped forward. He placed a hand on her shoulder. The blacksmith's son was staring at her, his face a canvas of horror and dawning comprehension. He finally understood the truth he had been blind to. "I see now," Nashoda said, his voice quiet but ringing with a profound clarity that cut through the grief in the room. He looked at Talina, and his eyes were filled with an awe that transcended love. He had seen her spirit from the very beginning. He had recognized the fire in her. He just hadn't known she was the one who lit the flame. "Your fire saved her," he said softly, his thumb gently stroking her shoulder. "Now, let mine save you." They left the settlement without another word. The blacksmith's son stood in the doorway, weeping, a broken man who finally understood what he had lost. The journey back to the Lakota camp was different. The silence was no longer tense. It was peaceful. It was the silence of understanding. Talina rode beside Nashoda, not as a refugee, but as an equal, a warrior in her own right. When they arrived, the entire camp was waiting. Shuya met them, her eyes knowing. Nashoda gathered the council of elders, and Talina, in a clear, steady voice, told them the whole truth. The story of her sister, of her father's evil, of the fire, of the sacrifice. When she was finished, a deep silence fell over the people. Makta, the widow who had scorned her, looked down at the ground in shame. The whispers against Talina died forever. They no longer saw a damaged girl. They saw a woman of immense courage, of impossible strength. A woman who had walked through fire for someone she loved. The ceremony was held the next day. It wasn't a wedding in the settler's sense. It was something deeper. It was an honoring. Talina did not kneel on a buffalo robe this time. She stood in the center of the circle, her head held high, her feet bare upon the earth. The scars were still there, but they were no longer marks of shame. They were a map of her journey. They were a testament to her love. Shuya came forward and placed a beautiful shawl, woven with the colors of the sunset, around her shoulders. An elder brought a necklace of polished river stones. Then Nashoda stepped before her. He wasn't holding a bow or a knife. He was holding the two broken pieces of the pine branch he had been carving, the one that had snapped under the force of his rage. He held them out to her. "A cradle needs strong sides," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but a home needs a strong heart. My heart was broken, like this wood. You have made it whole." He then took her hand, and for the first time he brought it to his lips, not in passion, but in reverence. "In my tongue," he whispered so only she could hear, "we have a name for a woman like you. Wiyan Wakan, a sacred woman, my sacred woman." She looked at him, her eyes shining with tears of joy, and she knew she was finally, truly home. They built their lodge by the river, a place of peace and new beginnings. The fire inside was always lit, a warm, steady glow against the darkness. A fire that didn't consume, but transformed. A fire that didn't mark you as ruined, but as reborn. If you believe that the deepest scars can lead to the greatest strength, and that true love is about honoring someone's story, then smash that subscribe button for more tales from the heart of the Old West. Ask yourself this: what would you be willing to walk through fire for? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one,